I'm going to turn it over to Erin Ryan from the Women's Public Policy Network, who is going to be our MC for the day. Take it away, Erin.
Great. Thank you so much, Michael. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Erin Ryan. I am the Managing Director of the Ohio Women's Public Policy Network. With President Biden visiting Columbus tomorrow to talk about the American Rescue Plan, we wanted to make sure that we had an opportunity to hold this event today to discuss an element of the package that's been largely, we think, overlooked, the child tax credit. And this has a unique significance for Ohio, which typically ranks in the bottom third of all states for child poverty, and where many of our large cities have been the unfortunate distinction of ranking near the top in annual surveys of childhood poverty. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our first speaker, State Representative Jeanine Boyd.
Good afternoon. Thanks everyone for joining us for this discussion, an incredibly vital discussion and perfectly timed. When I consider child poverty in Ohio, or anywhere for that matter, and especially as a newer mom, and by the way, you may hear my toddler in the background. This is life, so please bear with us. But as a newer mom, especially when I think of child poverty, I think of child hunger first. There is nothing, in my opinion, more devastating than the cry of a hungry child. And I think it's what nightmares are made of, and I think most parents would agree with that. I also think of the fact that in the General Assembly, the legislature where I have the privilege of serving, House District 9, and all citizens and residents of Ohio and children, I am astonished still every General Assembly when a colleague of mine from the other side of the aisle reintroduces a policy that would make it more difficult for families to attain SNAP benefits, which are formerly known as food stamps. And the pandemic has not changed that priority for the Ohio GOP. It's been reintroduced again, another obstacle for families to feed their children, versus the responses of so many communities like mine, and neighborhoods and worship homes and even school districts. So my home school district, for instance, Cleveland Heights University Heights, has distributed more than 500,000 pounds of produce to families from all over Cuyahoga County since the start of the pandemic. And when we consider the Census Bureau's last 5-year American Community Survey, the results actually were just released last year. There are 9 Ohio cities in which half the children live in poverty. And that includes, communities that we know about very well, such as East Cleveland up here in Cuyahoga County, all the way down, includes Youngstown. It includes Nelsonville, which is in Athens County, Ohio. Half the children are living in poverty. So I am so grateful that President Biden and Vice President Harris are breathing life back into the American dream and prioritizing children as they do that. They are keeping their promises through the American Rescue Plan, because, addressing child poverty through policy is a choice. You can make that decision to do that. And so by expanding and strengthening the child tax credit, they are making that choice. They are prioritizing all children. And my understanding from the Center for Budget and Policy is that the expanded and strengthened child tax credit will include over close to 950,000 children that were under 17 that were left out of the original child tax credit. It just in Ohio alone, 92% of Ohio's children whose families will have the benefit of the child tax credit. They will benefit from it. So again, I'm just very grateful for President Biden, Vice President Harris, keeping their promises and making all children, a priority of their policy and their administration.
Great, thank you so much, Representative Boyd. I'm going to turn it over now to Councilmember Elizabeth Brown.
Hi, thank you so much, Erin. And it's really great to be here with Representative Boyd and with Tracy Nahara. I am really excited to talk about the child tax credit and to do everything we can to try to bring additional attention to it. We were all talking before the room opened just about how this is really transformational social policy. And Representative Boyd talked about what that impact looks like. I want to talk a little more about how it works. So first of all, I'm like Representative Boyd, I'm a mother, and I think that everyone hates the idea of child poverty. And I think that it only becomes that much more personal when you've had the experience as a parent of meeting your child's needs and understanding the desperation that parents must feel when they cannot meet that need. Not because they aren't working so hard to be able to do it, but because it is out of reach. And that's some of the personal care that I bring to this question, and the reasons that I'm so glad we're talking today about the child tax credit. The child tax credit is actually a longstanding program to fight poverty, but under the old rules, it was literally a credit. Parents would claim it on their taxes for their qualifying children, and it was capped at $2,000 per child. And importantly, it was only partially refundable. So many parents weren't getting any actual money in their pocket to help with rent or transportation or diapers. It was just kind of reducing the liability they owed on their new taxes. But the new child tax credit is in some ways really more like a guaranteed income for families with children, which is common in other Western democracies. First, the relief package lifts the cap on the credit from $2,000, where it was, to $3,000 per child, up to age 17, and $3,600 per child under the age of 6. Second key way that the credit has changed, more families are eligible. The size of the benefit will gradually diminish for single filers earning more than $75,000 per year, but you get the full credit up to that amount, or married couples making more than $150,000 a year. Third, the benefit is now fully refundable. This is so important. It provides additional relief, financial relief to families earning the least. Because under a non-refundable model, a taxpayer with a credit that exceeds what they owe would only be able to receive up to $1,400 as a refund. The rest perhaps just offsetting the taxes they owed. And fourth and most exciting is that it's not only fully refundable, but it will be paid out as payments on a monthly basis. $300 per child under age 6 and $250 per child through age 17, starting this July. The expanded program allows for households without any income to claim the credit, meaning that parents who are not employed, and let's remember in the middle of COVID, how particularly important this is, parents who are not employed will still be able to access the benefit. The way COVID has changed our economy means that the child tax credit and the changes contained in the American Rescue Plan could not come at a more meaningful time. When we look at the jobless rates, especially for women, women have borne the brunt of unemployment and the hits to industry that COVID has caused. Women have borne the brunt of those, and especially Black and Latino women have borne the brunt of those changes in the economy. I was just reading something about how there's kind of an artificial narrowing of the wage gap at the moment. And it is only because some of the lowest paid jobs, which women disproportionately held, are gone. right? If you think about, hotel employees, hotel housekeepers, if you think about restaurant workers, all of these service-based industries, even childcare centers, which are having to operate, within sort of reduced models, all of these industries that women represented disproportionately the majority of the workforce, those were hit first and worst by COVID. And so think about what that does to families. When women have financial instability, that translates to families. So for families who are listening, in order to benefit from the CTC, I have a couple recommendations. First, file your taxes as soon as possible. Even if you don't normally have to file taxes, and especially if your income in 2020 is down under what it was in 2019, likely because of COVID, although there could be a host of reasons, of course. Second, if you can, try to make sure you link a bank account to your federal tax filing, if that's possible, if you have one. That way, the federal government will know where to direct the funds. After the payment is sent out monthly between July and December, you will be able to claim the remaining balance of the credit next year when you file your 2021 taxes. And I want to be clear also about why I'm so excited about the changes to the CTC, and that it is real transformational social policy in our country. Here in Columbus, 1/3 of our children live in poverty. That has only been exacerbated by the pandemic. And the typical structural supports that families had, being in school, the village around us, community centers, programming, all of these things are much harder for families to access. We know that. I also want to give you an example of a new study out of Cal State Fresno, talked about diapers. And I think that this is the perfect example of why something like the child tax credit is so important. The researcher at Cal State Fresno spoke with about 70 women who are diaper insecure. And I'll ask any parents who are on the phone or on the line or listening to just sort of think, I have a new baby, and she's 3 months old. And if you asked me how many diapers we had, I wouldn't be able to tell you down to the number. I would tell you, I know we need to get a box every month, but I wouldn't be able to tell you how many are in the cupboard right now. And the 70 women that this researcher spoke with, they're diaper insecure, meaning they track down to the ounce the urine output that their babies have in order to make sure they have enough diapers. Half of the women she spoke with said this is their number one concern. Diapers are not covered by WIC. Diapers are not covered by SNAP. But if you go without diapers for your child, you risk urinary tract infection, you risk severe diaper rash. And these are the kind of stressors on top of being poor that we're putting on families by not giving them the basic ability to meet the needs of their families as they know they need them. So the program itself will cut poverty for children in this country in ways that we haven't seen in a generation. It will cut poverty for Black children by 52%, by 45% for Hispanic children, and by 61% for Indigenous children. And it does so through one very basic tenet, which is that if we give families resources, if we give families money, they know how to spend it. We need to trust families to know how to provide for their children. And that's exactly what this new child tax credit does. The impact of the expanded program will be immensely felt in households across Columbus, across Ohio, of course, and across the nation. And thank you. Erin, back to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Councilmember Brown. I'm going to turn over to our last speaker, Tracy Nahara, the Executive Director of the Children's Defense Fund, Ohio.
Thank you so much. So at Children's Defense Fund of Ohio, we're a civil rights organization for children. And our goal since our founding 50 years ago has been to end child poverty. So we can all agree that children, and we want our children to grow and flourish in supportive communities where they have an equal shot at a bright future. And that means investing in them. So the CDF in Ohio, we are so incredibly thrilled and excited by this legislation, the American Rescue Plan, because several years ago, we published a report on poverty and strategies that could be implemented at the federal level to basically cut poverty in half. And the CTC was right at the top of the list. So the inclusion of this policy really is a step in the right direction, because we know that poverty is a violence that's inflicted on our children every day, and one that we choose as a society, because through our policy decisions, through our funding decisions, we have the power to end poverty. We have the power to make significant reductions in it. And this legislation is a commitment towards that end. It's a commitment to our children and to their families. You know, I was just listening to my colleagues here, Representative Boyd and Councilmember Brown, and they're both young mothers and talking about, you know, the diapers and talking about the formula. And it reminds me of when I was a new mom many moons ago. And, you know, just how financially, the financial pressure, you know, that it puts on a young parent, you know, as they're trying to make ends meet. And during this pandemic, the state of Ohio saw 900,000 people losing their employment. Now, thankfully, we've regained about 2/3 of those jobs, but that still means that there's over 300 Ohioans who had jobs a year ago that right now they're struggling. And many of those other people that have, you know, thankfully been able to regain employment, you know, hopefully the wages that they're earning are helping meet their basic needs of their family. Now, a couple of things that I want to share is that we know that poverty stacks the odds against children, right? And it stalks them throughout their lives. So, and we know that Ohio families, even before this pandemic, they were struggling. And what we saw was not only the weaknesses in our safety nets, but we saw how threadbare they actually were. So before the pandemic, about 500,000 children in the state were living in poverty. So about 1 in 5, which is shocking, right? It's shocking when you see a group of children, know that 1 in 5 might be going to bed hungry, might be waking up not knowing where their meal is going to come from, or going to, you know, during the day, not knowing where they're going to be sleeping that evening. And during this time also, we know that many children have been struggling with their own health insurance, their health coverage, and getting services. So it's been hitting us in so many different directions. And the US Census Bureau, they've actually done a great job of doing periodic surveys of families, of people, of, you know, individuals, just finding out how they're doing, how they're faring during this time. And one of the most recent surveys that they conducted revealed to us a couple things. Number one was that 14% of Ohio families with children reported this past fall that they were sometimes or not always having enough to eat, or having to skip meals to make sure their children had enough to eat. Nearly 1 in 6 families with children said they only had slight confidence or none that they'd be able to make their next rent or mortgage payments. In fact, here in Ohio, just recently, I think just as recently as this morning, we heard that about 10% of Ohioans were behind on rent. And that's about 370,000 households. So this new package will definitely help mitigate many of these risks in providing so much in resources. And given just the dire situation that so many of our families and children are facing, the American Rescue Plan is great news for Ohio. It is truly a down payment in securing the future of our children in the Buckeye State and across this country. And one of the things we also want to really emphasize is that making this type of legislation, this type of policy, anti-poverty policy, permanent, you know, really strengthens the opportunities for all our children. and gives them that shot at life that we all want them to have as parents, as communities, as relatives. It's what they need, it's what they deserve. And as mentioned previously, 92% of children under the age of 18 in Ohio will benefit from this. That means that an additional 132,000 children in this state will either get closer to that poverty line or be lifted above it. And I think that's something that we should all be very excited about, and we should all keep working towards. There's so much more work to be done, obviously, but this is definitely something that should be made permanent for all children. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Tracy. We'll take some questions now. So if folks have questions, please feel free to unmute yourself and direct them towards a certain speaker or to the group, or you can drop them in the chat and I will read them out for folks.
Hi, this is Noah Blundo with Hannah News Service. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
we can hear you.
Okay, thanks. Great. On that last point, can you clarify how much of are the entirety of the changes temporary, or is it just the amount? Can you anybody explain that a little more detail?
Of course. So the policy itself is set to expire at the end of this year. So this increase in child tax credits is only through the end of this year. So additional legislation would have to be passed to make it permanent. I don't know if any of my colleagues would like to add on to that.
No, I mean, that's exactly right. And I think, and Tracy said this in her comments, but it is it's critically important. And there are already folks arguing for needing to extend it. We are talking about this today because we're glad that it's done for this year, but it should be a permanent program. We were all also just talking about before we opened up the room to press how much I personally, think this program can be as transformational as Social Security, so that when my children are old enough to be having children, I hope that they are in the position to take for granted the CTC the way so many people take for granted Social Security. In fact, it's really a statement by our government that we care about kids and that is in our interest to protect them and to foster healthy development. And that's really a statement, what this policy does. Budgeting is a statement of values, and that's what we're seeing right here. And those who don't support the CTC, I really question what they value about our country and our people.
And I'll just add, in terms of juxtaposition, that our own governor in Ohio was quoted this morning as saying that if he were in the United States Senate today, he would have voted against this policy. He would have voted against the American Rescue Plan. And when I consider, for instance, the legislature and the sorts of bills like the one I spoke of previously, that makes it more difficult for families to attain SNAP, I think about what Councilwoman Brown just said. Ohio is, if not for the federal government, if not for President Biden and Vice President Harris and the current Congress, Ohio left to itself, legislators in the majority would not be making the choice of putting children first and lifting them out of poverty. They consistently demonstrate that that is not a priority for them and that that's not where they are. So again, very grateful that the current administration and Congress are putting the well-being of all children first.
And I just want to also emphasize that, Children's Defense Fund of Ohio and all of our colleagues, we advocate for whole child well-being. We've heard time and time again from our, policy leaders at the local, state, federal level that they want children to thrive. They want to invest in all these things like infant mortality, maternal mortality, you know, increased educational outcomes. But one of the things we need to remember here is that childhood is a critical stage in life for establishing those foundations for health, for education. Children's rapidly growing bodies and brains require consistent access to food, stable housing, utilities, healthcare, childcare, and even for a brief amount of time or deprivation, right, that poverty brings with it, it can cause long-lasting health implications, mental health implications, I mean, just family instability in general. So if these are the things that you truly believe in, that you truly want to invest in, we need to start with childhood poverty. And this policy, this program, this legislation sets the foundation for longer term transformational change to a country that in Ohio, I think that our children, right, that we want our children to embrace, that we want them to stay for, and that values them.
Great. Any other questions from folks? Again, please feel free to unmute yourself or drop your questions into the chat box. Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, everybody. We really appreciate you all taking the time to join us today. And again, to Tracy, Rep. Boyd, and Councilmember Brown for talking through the impact of the child tax credits and the American Rescue Plan on children and families here in Ohio.